He believed she'd disappear quietly, just another woman swallowed by bad luck and empty promises. But the mountains had different plans. They always do. It began the week the rain wouldn't stop. Not the sort that cleans the air or glistens on leaves, but the sort that falls with purpose, steady and relentless, like the sky itself was grieving. The highway gleamed under it, long veins of gray water threading through the valley. Cars passed her by, headlights streaking like ghosts, none slowing, none curious about the woman standing at the edge of the gas station lot with everything she owned in a torn canvas bag and a half-famished golden retriever pressed against her leg. Her name was Evelyn Shaw, and the world had recently decided she was no longer useful. A week earlier, she'd been sitting behind a desk at the nursing home, filling out shift schedules, pretending the fluorescent lights didn't make her dizzy. She'd been the type of worker who never missed a shift, who smiled even when her hands shook from too much coffee and too little sleep. But when new management came, they brought words like restructuring and cost efficiency. They didn't look at her when they said it. They just handed her a paper, thanked her for her service, and wished her luck. Luck. That word still tasted bitter. Now she was here, rain-soaked, staring at the map on her phone that blinked a little cabin icon 2 hours north. An online auction win she still wasn't sure was real. $200 ASIS remote mountain property. No guarantee of livability. She'd bid on it at 3.0 inches the morning, the night she lost her job, mostly out of exhaustion and spite. She hadn't expected to win, but the confirmation email had come anyway, and it said she owned it, some forgotten patch of land, deep in the pines, and address most GPS apps refused to recognize. It wasn't much, but it was something, and when you have nothing left, something is enough. She and the dog, his name was Jasper, walked until the gas station lights faded behind them. The rain eased into mist as the road curved upward, swallowed by evergreens. The air smelled of wet earth and pine sap, cold and clean. Her sneakers squished. The dog's breath came out in white clouds. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled like a door closing. By nightfall, they reached a rusted gate half buried in moss. The paint was long gone, the hinges groaning when she pushed. A wooden sign dangled by one chain. Property of Harland Estate. She didn't know a Harlan. Maybe whoever he was, he'd left this place behind a long time ago. The driveway was more of a trail. Mud and roots and scattered stones. Each step felt like a trespass. When the cabin finally appeared through the fog, it looked smaller than the listing photo, hunched and forgotten under a slanted roof heavy with moss. 2 windows stared out like dull eyes. The porch sagged. A single lantern hook hung by the door. Empty. Evelyn stood there a long time before stepping closer. The dog sniffed the air, uneasy. Inside, the smell hit first. Old wood, damp paper, something faintly metallic beneath it all. She flicked her flashlight around. One room, a cold fireplace, a table with one leg propped by a stone, an iron bed frame leaning against the wall. The floor creaked like it had memories. She felt them under her feet, quiet, watching. She dropped her bag and exhaled for the first time all day. "This is it, Jasper," she whispered. "Home." The dog's tail thumped once, hesitant. She set out a blanket for him and sat on the floor, leaning against the wall. The rain started again, softer now, like fingers drumming on the roof. She listened to it until her eyelids grew heavy. In the dark, the mountainside, morning came pale and shrouded in fog. She stepped outside barefoot, hugging her jacket around her. The forest stretched endless, pines fading into white mist, the type of quiet that makes your breath sound too loud. Somewhere nearby, water trickled. A creek, maybe. She followed the sound through ferns and mud until she found it. A narrow stream carving through rock, silver, and cold. Jasper drank greedily. For the first time in days, Evelyn smiled. Back at the cabin, she explored. The place had been abandoned for decades, maybe longer. A stack of yellowed newspapers from 1979 sat under the table leg. The headline read, "Local family vanishes in storm. Search called off." She folded it back without reading more. The wind shifted, and the door creaked like a whisper. She tried not to think about it. By noon, she had started cleaning, sweeping dust, shaking out rags, patching holes in the window with tape from her bag. It was pointless, but movement felt better than stillness. Every time she paused, she thought she heard something. A faint knocking, like wood settling, or footsteps where there shouldn't be any. When she found the photograph, she froze. It was wedged behind the fireplace stones. A small, faded picture curled at the edges. A woman in a long dress standing right where Evelyn was now. The same cabin behind her, though newer. Fresh paint, bright windows, flowers by the porch. The woman's eyes were half hidden by glare, but her smile was strange, too wide, almost strained. Beside her stood a man, tall hand resting on her shoulder. She turned it over. Someone had written in pencil, May 6th, 1979, Heron and me, our forever home. Evelyn set it down carefully. That night, she lit a candle and sat by the fireplace. The photo on the table beside her, the light flickered across the walls, tracing patterns like moving shadows. She could hear Jasper's steady breathing near the door. The sound grounded her, but sometimes beneath it there was another rhythm, like footsteps on old wood. She told herself it was the wind. She didn't quite believe it. By the third day, the silence had changed. It wasn't empty anymore. It felt occupied. When she walked from one side of the room to the other, she caught glimpses of movement in her peripheral vision, shifts in the fog outside the window, reflections that didn't belong to her. At dusk, Jasper started barking at the floorboards near the hearth. His hackles rose, claws scraping the wood. Evelyn knelt beside him. The boards there were newer, mismatched, nailed down unevenly. She hesitated, then fetched the crowbar she'd found by the porch steps. One nail popped loose easily, then another. The wood lifted with a long, tired groan. Underneath was a small hollow. Inside it lay a metal box, rusted shut. Her pulse quickened. She pried at the latch until it gave. Inside were papers brittle with age, letters, receipts, a birth certificate, and a small tarnished key. At the very bottom, wrapped in cloth, was a locket. She opened it. 2 portraits faded and cracked. The woman from the photo, the man beside her. She ran her thumb over the glass, and for a second, she thought she felt warmth beneath it. The wind outside rose suddenly, howling through the chimney. Jasper whimpered. Evelyn stood clutching the locket. The candle flickered out. For a long moment, the only sound was her heartbeat. Then faintly she heard it. A whisper. Not words exactly, more like breath shaped by grief. It came from behind her near the door. When she turned, nothing was there. The fog pressed against the window like it wanted in. That night, sleep didn't come easily. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw faces she didn't know. A man standing in the rain, calling for someone. A woman reaching toward a child just out of frame. Sometimes she saw herself standing by the creek, her reflection in the water shifting into someone else's. She woke to Jasper, growling low. The air felt charged, heavy. Then she noticed it. The smell, smoke. She bolted upright. The fireplace was dark, but the smoke came from under the door. She flung it open and froze. Outside, the world glowed orange. But it wasn't fire. It was light, soft, radiant, pulsing like breath. It came from the trees themselves, as if the fog had caught fire without heat. In the center of it stood a silhouette, human still. Her first thought was, someone's here. Her second was, they've been here all along. The figure didn't move. She couldn't see a face, only the outline. Shoulders slumped, head bowed. Then slowly it raised a hand pointing toward the cabin, toward her. She blinked, and the light went out. Just darkness, just the mountain. She stood in the doorway for a long time, heart hammering, until the cold drove her back inside. Jasper wouldn't stop pacing. She whispered his name, and he came to her, pressing close. She stayed like that until dawn, the locket clutched in her palm. When morning came, she found footprints in the mud, bare feet, small, leading from the forest to her door and then stopping. She didn't leave. She couldn't. Something about the place had rooted her there in its quiet grief. The more she learned, the less she wanted to run. The letters from the box told fragments of a story. Harlan and Margaret Wren, a couple who'd built this cabin in 1975. The handwriting was careful, elegant. At first, the letters were mundane. Lists, notes, reminders. But the later ones changed. Phrases grew erratic. One read, "The forest keeps calling her name. Says it won't stop until I listen." Another, "If the light comes again, don't follow it." Evelyn folded them one by one, stacking them neatly on the table. She didn't know why she felt like she was intruding on something sacred. That afternoon, Jasper disappeared. One moment, he was chasing something near the creek. The next, the fog rolled in, and he was gone. She called until her throat hurt. His name echoed, swallowed by trees. No answer. As night fell, panic turned to exhaustion. She left the lantern burning by the porch in case he found his way back. The forest hummed low, restless. She was halfway to sleep when she heard scratching at the door. Relief flooded through her, but when she opened it, Jasper wasn't there. Only the locket lying in the dirt. It was open. The pictures were gone. She looked up at the forest. Somewhere within, a faint light flickered between the trees, small, moving, like someone holding a lantern. Her heart stuttered. She stepped out barefoot, the cold mud gripping her feet, and the door creaked shut behind her. The fog closed in. The light moved farther away, waiting, and somewhere in that silence, she heard Jasper bark, distant, desperate. She ran toward the sound. She ran toward the sound, and the world became breath and wet needles, and the slap of her feet on mud, the fog opening and closing like a curtain around her, while Jasper's bark cut through it, urgent and thin, the sort of sound a body makes when it's being pulled farther away. And she told herself, not again, not another thing taken. And when a branch struck her cheek, it stung like a clock waking up, reminding her that pain means the body is still here and moving and able to choose. The creek tilted toward her voice, then away, then back again, as if the water couldn't decide whose story it was supposed to carry. And when she slid down a shallow gully, she saw him at last. Jasper, trembling and stubborn and clawing at a hump of earth swallowed by ferns, eyes lit with the frantic good sense dogs have when they know more than we do. And there, beneath his paws, a square of wood outlined in stone with an iron ring set like a knuckle in the center. She knelt, brushed aside slick leaves, and found a hatch notched by weather and time. Its plank carved with a gouged M that the rot tried to turn into a V, but couldn't quite finish. M like Margaret, or maybe like the shape a mouth makes when it can't decide whether to call for help or hold its breath. The ring was cold in her palm, colder than the mist, colder than fear, and when she pulled the hatch, resisted as if memory were a heavy lid, then gave with a long sigh and a thread of stale air that smelled of old apples, dry wood, and the faint sweetness of things once preserved. Jasper stepped back, but did not run. She put the phone's flashlight between her teeth and descended the narrow steps, muttering, "Okay, easy, okay." The prayer of people who trust the next breath more than promises. And at the bottom, the light slid over shelves, lined with glass jars, the color of amber tea, a shovel with a handle polished by hands she didn't know, and a stone wall that kept its secrets discreetly except for a small, precise rectangle in the center. A fitted panel with a lock as modest as a dress pocket. The little tarnished key from the box upstairs had always felt like a promise losing patience, and when she slid it in and turned, the click was soft, almost ashamed, as if opening were a private act. The panel swung inward to reveal a shallow niche, a tin strong box with a worn latch, a stack of cloth-bound notebooks softened to the color of fog, and a small cassette recorder with 3 tapes wrapped in wax paper, each labeled in the careful hand of a woman who measured her words like flour. For whoever comes, 1-3. She lifted the strong box first because the movies teach you to chase gold. But even before the latch lifted, She sensed the weight inside wasn't money so much as meanings. Envelopes addressed to the sheriff, the Reverend Ruth at the store, and one to her own if he forgives me, and beneath them, a folded cloth parcel tied with twine that cracked like dry hair when she untied it, revealing dull, glowing, handmade jewelry and a fan of U.S. savings bonds whose numbers turned the air steadier by simply existing. Her throat tightened, not from greed, but relief, the sort that feels like a soft chair appearing in a room that had only floors. She set the box down, sat on the bottom step, slid tape one into the recorder, and pressed play. A sleeve brushed plastic. Then a voice, neither old nor young, the age of someone keeping her hands busy to keep her mind from unraveling, spoke. "If you are listening, I suppose we did not come back the way we hoped. My name is Margaret Wren. The cabin above your head is mine, and was home to Harlan and a daughter I only sometimes could look at without thinking of weather." The room leaned closer. "You think we vanished in a storm?" She said because the paper needed a word. "We didn't vanish. We split. The storm didn't take us. We walked into it." She told the life of an ordinary year. Chores, church, jars cooling on a towel, and the light in the trees that folks called foxfire, or trick eyes, or God, if they needed him nearby. And how she, after the baby, had darkness like a basement she kept forgetting she was in. And how one night she followed the glow just far enough to imagine a promise. And how their little girl did the same because wonder is a door that doesn't care about your reasons. And how they sealed the root cellar afterward, and swore off listening to anything except each other, but still drifted, each hoping distance might be a bridge. Evelyn listened until the tape's hiss became the sound of breath between sentences, then slid in tape two. "Little bird," Margaret said, and the room found a warmer shape. "If you're my girl, or if you're just someone else's, I'll speak to you as if you were mine. The box has papers to make the world less hungry. Take what you need, leave what you can. There's also a map, notebook 3, page 37, stones and lichen, and a tin buried near the split creek. Photographs inside, the only ones I could bear. Tell Harlan the light wasn't holy or evil, only a weather that lives up here like owls do. Tell him we tried to choose wonder and stay. Tell a good dog he did his job." Evelyn closed her eyes, not to pretend she was the daughter on the tape, not to argue, but to let the kindness sit without interrogating it. She kept tape 3 for daylight, gathered the bonds, the deed, a few letters and the notebooks, wrapped the jewelry back into its small bed, and climbed out into fog that felt less like a threat now and more like a shawl left for anyone cold enough to accept it. Back at the creek, with the mist lifting to show a peter sky, she stood where the water split and found the stone hand Margaret had drawn, pried up the tin wrapped in oilcloth, and unfolded photographs of ordinary summer. Tire swing, fresh paint, a man squint, smiling with a hammer, a woman with a toddler clinging to her dress, the child's hat, lopsided from too much love. Not Evelyn's years, not her blood, but her mountains. And that was enough to make her bow her head, as if someone had just placed a palm there and called it blessing. Back at the cabin, she coaxed a signal to life and checked the bond numbers and felt an ache release along her shoulders when values turned into a future that wasn't just narrow corridors. She called a county number from the deed and learned polite phrases, quiet title, heirs unlocated, hearing dates, wrote them down like a recipe, trusting that meaning would rise when heat was applied. Later, an old green truck climbed the rutted drive with the calm of a creature that believed in return. The man who stepped out said his name was Nate and that he'd been carrying news even after the route and uniform ended, habit being a type of loyalty. He studied the porch and the dog and the woman with damp hair and said, "You're either lost or found." "Haven't decided yet?" she said, and he nodded like that was the correct answer. "Her own?" she asked. "Went," Nate said. "Milled lumber, carved birds from driftwood when the drinking made edges sharp, sold them to tourists who wanted to buy a story and a bird for the same $5. Kind when he could be, hurt when he couldn't." She told him she was the caretaker, and the words settled in the air with the right weight, as if the house had been waiting for a title that didn't pretend to own. After he left eggs on the stoop, the way men like him leave small, round comforts, she set tape 3 into the recorder and pressed play. "If there's a third tape," Margaret said, "it means I kept trying to forgive myself and wasn't sure whether I had. Money is freedom sometimes, so I left some, but I wanted to leave something else, a choice. The panel above the fireplace isn't just pretty. Press the right side with your hand." Evelyn did, and the wood yielded like a held breath. Inside, a wooden cross, a dried bundle of lavender, a folded sheet listing first names of women who had passed through. The words stayed or left written beside each, and a last blank line with the words she chose. "I wanted a place where a woman can learn to stand in a doorway and be asked nothing except what she needs." Margaret said, "A place where the light repeats itself, so you can practice saying no without shame. We failed sometimes. We tried." The tape sighed to its end, not with the drumbeat of closure, but with the soft release of someone laying down a heavy jar. The quiet after wasn't empty. It was full of small domestic noises, the hush a room keeps for the next person who will call it home. Rain began again, kind this time. She set the list on the table, wrote only her first name on the last line, left the stayed left column empty because some choices asked to be made daily, and then fell into the practical work that stitches souls, sanding the table until it remembered a softer life, patching the screen with thread pulled from a shirt hem, walking to town for nails and lamp oil, and a loaf that sprang back to shape as if it enjoyed being held. When people asked, she said caretaker again and didn't apologize. At night, she read the notebooks in sips, recipes precise as love, budgets that pledged allegiance to flour and wood, sentences that admitted darkness without marrying it, and sometimes spoke aloud to the walls because naming the room felt like turning on a small light. Once, while she stood in the doorway with a mug cooling between her hands, the glow moved through the trees again, gentle, sure of itself, the sort of light that could be followed without disaster. But she didn't follow. She touched the doorframe instead and listened to the silence answer like a friend. On a morning that felt rinsed clean, she visited the county office, signed papers that smelled faintly of onion skin and rain, and asked about setting aside part of the bonds for anyone who needed a stopping place on this road. Nothing fancy, just a bed and a kettle and a promise. No questions that make you small. The clerk looked at her as if she had spoken the exact size of an unsolved thought and said, "It could be done." On the way back, she stopped at a cluttered thrift store where driftwood birds perched on a shelf as if pausing mid-migration. The tag beneath them read, "Harlan, $5 each." She bought one shaped like a wren, placed it on the mantel beneath the empty locket, and told the room that sometimes the story brings you a feather to prove it heard you. That evening she walked to the ridge Margaret had promised would show the valley like a lap. Fog lay down in the hollows, the pines whispered their slow grammar, and the creek told itself again. She thought of the old veteran at the nursing home who had squeezed her hand and said, "You look like somebody who knows where to put a sorry." And she answered him, "Now, here on this table, with bread, with listening." The light threaded between trees far below and settled finally near the bend in the road. Not a lure now, not a dare, just a lantern someone had set down so travelers could see their feet. She felt something inside her put away its suitcase. In the days that followed, the cabin changed by degrees. A shelf grew along one wall with the notebooks and photographs and mismatched frames because matching made the room too careful. A new lock clicked at night, not to keep anything out, but to tell her the day had agreed to end. She recorded her own tape on a cheap machine, a single message for whoever might arrive, trembling. "You are allowed to rest. You don't owe us your story to earn it. Take what you need. Pay back later with truth in small ways." She slid the cassette beside Margaret's stack and closed the niche. Nate taught her how to plane a door that swelled in October. She taught herself the names of mushrooms she would never pick. Letters traveled. One addressed to a forwarding service rumored to find heron, enclosing a copy of a photograph and a note that said simply, "There is a shelf here. You can leave anything you like upon it." Some afternoon she stood by the creek and let the cold make her certain. Some nights she lay awake, listening, and heard only the honest tally of wood and wind, and the damp sigh of a room that had been forgiven. One dusk, the fog blew thin, and she saw someone on the trail stop at the edge of the yard, hand hovering in the air, the way a person's hand hovers before knocking. The figure waited, then turned away, then came back, then leaned against the porch post and cried the small, private cry of someone who has found a place to be briefly weak. Evelyn didn't ask. She opened the door and said, "Tea or water?" The woman laughed once, startled, as if such questions had gone out of fashion, and said, "Water first." They sat at the wobbling table that didn't wobble anymore and considered the miracle of a clean glass. The story came later or didn't. It didn't matter. When the woman left the next morning, she squeezed Evelyn's arm and said, "I feel like I slept in a sentence somebody had been saving for me." After she was gone, Evelyn added a new first name to the list and wrote, "Stayed for one night," which is sometimes the same as stayed for a year if you measure with the right instrument. On a clear afternoon, Jasper nosed behind the woodpile and came up triumphant with an old ceramic button, blue as creek shadow. She cleaned it and sewed it into the curtain because objects like stories approve of being used. The glow returned from time to time, never with menace, always with the patience of weather. She let it be. Once she followed it only as far as the porch steps and said aloud, "Thank you, but we're fine here." And the fog seemed to nod. On the day the first snow carried the smell of iron and linen, a package arrived by Nate's hand, a rough little bird carved from pale wood, its wings not symmetrical, its beak too blunt. No note. She placed it beside the wren. At night, its shadow made a small mountain on the wall, and she liked how it looked when the flame wavered. The cabin bought for $200, and a dare she had made to herself at 3.0 inches the morning, no longer felt haunted in the way people mean when they mean fear. It felt occupied by attention, by the lists and jars, and a woman's steady voice captured in plastic, by a dog who knew where to scratch, by the sound of wind threading old nails. Value, she realized, is sometimes numbers, and sometimes a room where no one asks you to translate your sorrow into a shape that fits their shelf. She pressed her palm to the panel once more, felt the wood warm under her hand, and let it close. The light outside thinned to ash, then to lavender, then to the honest dark that arrives without theater. She turned down the lamp, climbed into the bed she had made from one frame and a handful of stubborn screws, and the house settled around her, not empty, but full of small, resting lives. The creek recounting itself, Jasper sighing, the pine boughs giving their slow applause. If any ghosts still lived here, they were the sort that sit at the table and help you find the right page, the sort that know when to be quiet and when to pass the salt. She closed her eyes and did not dream of being chased or of doors she couldn't open. She dreamed of shelves that did not sag under the weight of what had been left on them, and of a morning when fog lifted cleanly and let the sun find the floorboards, and of a woman herself standing in the doorway with a cup, ready to choose again and again the simplest, bravest thing today.